And such a big phrase in there is, which is a phrase that I think about a lot too, is that unnecessary violence,
Yeah.
unnecessary suffering. I'm going to ask you maybe an impossible question, but I think it's critical to what we're talking about and what we're trying to achieve. How do we define unnecessary violence? Because as most things, I would imagine violence, suffering, it's all a spectrum, the necessariness of it versus not. How do we think about drawing that line, saying that's okay, that's not? Do you have a thought on that? Do you have a perspective?
So I think there's many nuances to it, but to give an answer that I think works 95% of the time would be to say that initiating violence is virtually never acceptable.
Human
And
to human to
violence,
human. Just sticking with that for now. It's probably
yeah,
true
let's
beyond,
let's
but just
stick
keep it
with
with that. Okay.
human to human violence, yes. And when violence is a defense, that is in a sense necessary violence.
Hmm. Yeah. See, it's interesting too, because there's like multiple dimensions to this, right? When we think about initiating or necessary, because there's the simple approach to it, which you're saying, which doesn't mean it's wrong or bad in any way. I actually very much agree with it. That idea, if we can all just understand that, just don't initiate it, right?
Right.
It's you can use it as defense if needed, but it even starts, you can start to hone in on that and say, like, well, when do I need to defend myself? If I think somebody's going to do something to me, if I start to see a threat that's coming close, can I react then? Does it have to be when somebody like all that nuance
Yeah.
becomes, and it starts to get philosophical. It starts to get to human nature, that if
Yeah.
we are designed, as you mentioned before, the law of the jungle, and we're animals, we just happen to be at the top of the food chain. If it's ingrained in our DNA, either biologically, evolutionary, maybe from God, who knows, that power dynamics, that sense of structure and order in the world and how it functions is just built into us, that we're always going to have this sense that I need to protect certain things and I need to. Can we ever actually get to a place where we think any of it is unnecessary? Or is it an unfortunate, inconvenient truth that it is necessary? I don't know, right? I'm taking the more pessimistic view, but what's your thoughts on that?
It's there's really difficult questions in there. And in some sense, I hope for myself and everyone that there are few instances, if not no instances, in my life and the lives of others where such distinctions are actually important. Because at the point where those are important distinctions, we're most likely in a very difficult situation that there may not even be a right thing to do or a good answer for. And whatever we do, we may be looking back at that and wondering about that moment
Mm.
for the rest of our lives. So, in some sense, I actually do think that that makes such questions very important to at least be aware of and to be clear about what our values are, what our principles are. But I don't think we can ever be fully prepared for what those moments are actually going to look like either.
Mm. It goes back to where we were earlier in the conversation. I think it's that same theme of there's no clear answers. You're never going to know for sure. You're never going to be completely humble. It's just the acknowledgement, the awareness, and the consciousness that there is unnecessary violence out there. And
Right.
once I can accept that that's true and that I'm a human, therefore I'm capable of it, the best I can do is check myself as best I can. I'm still going to get it wrong sometimes,
Yeah,
unfortunately, right? That's just the
absolutely.
reality. Hopefully not. Hopefully I minimize it as much as possible. But if I at least acknowledge that it's out there and I'm capable of it and I'm
Yeah,
aware of it, it gives me a chance maybe to catch it and minimize the amount of times it happens.
right. And it actually brings me back as well to the importance of doing healing work. And, so that we see the choice, so that we perhaps have a moment of where in the past, before we did healing work, it might have just been a pure reaction, like there's nothing to do here but respond with violence. And there could be situations where there really isn't anything to do. And I mean, as much as I hope to never be involved with violence again, honestly, I would, if my own life was threatened, if the life of my wife was threatened, I could respond violently. I haven't, people who take a vow of peacefulness, I admire that. I I I think that's wonderful in a sense. And honestly, I wouldn't do that.
Mm, mm,
While at the same time, violence truly would be a very last resort when I didn't see any other option to to protect the safety and the life of myself or someone who I care about
mm,
deeply.
mm, mm,
But those moments, having having a peacefulness within ourselves, having done the healing work and seeing that there are other options. I had an instance, actually, it was about 7 years ago now. So, really, I think I was 40 or 41 at the time. And there was a situation that I easily could have interpreted as violence being inevitable. I have no doubt if it had happened 20 years before that I would have been fighting. Someone was barreling towards me, screaming at me. And and I was well aware of the possibility of violence. And I was able to make a choice. And I will say I was right on the edge of it. It easily could have gone another way, but the situation did de-escalate, and we both walked away without uh anything other than a little bit, than me being pushed backwards.
mm,
That was as far as it went. And in some sense, I have a lot of there are things in the situation. I still would absolutely not say that I was, that I responded perfectly in the situation. There's things that I look back on, not so much in that moment, but in the moments that led up to it. I was like, yeah, there's moments I could have chosen something differently to perhaps have de-escalated so that it didn't even reach that point. So, there was certainly a lot for me to work through what happened there. And I will say that all of those years of healing work that I'd done, in a sense, I could even say paid off in that moment, in that there was no violence against me. I didn't commit violence against anyone else. We walked away intact,
mm.
at least physically. A lot of emotional hurt, I would say, in both of us, but that's the value of healing work.
Mm. And I would go on to say, even that illustration of afterwards, as you went back and thought about what that's additional healing work, I would say, of you not
Absolutely.
resting in that, saying like, oh, I got it right that time, no violence, I must have this again, saying no, maybe there was even still more. Which, listen, I say this often, for people listening, that could sound exhausting. That could sound like, but you want me to question all of it, you want me to think about all of it, and I get it. Believe me, I get it. But I think what we're saying in this conversation is like, you don't have to, but
No.
the pain, the discomfort, the suffering, it's going to come in some form. You
Right.
can do it in this form through this healing work, which is uncomfortable. Let's not shy around that. It can be very uncomfortable to do this work and face the things that force you to think violence is the only option. But compared to what comes when the violence actually comes, it seems like the much better option. So it's not the easy route. It just
No.
seems to be the better route for humanity, I think, is what we're saying, right?